Hi everyone, welcome back to our VIP newsletter. I'm so excited this month to introduce you to someone who I absolutely adore. He's Professor Marc Cohen. Professor Marc Cohen is a medical doctor as well as a professor at RMIT University and one of Australia's most recognised wellness experts. As you know, Divine isn't just about what we put on our skin. It's also about educating others as to the importance of consuming and using all things certified organic and living as a toxic-free life as possible. I wanted to also share with you that recently I attended an event with Marc in Melbourne, and it was about genetically modified ingredients or genetically modified crops. And it is really scary, and Marc's going to share about that. I'd love to now ask Marc to introduce himself so that he can share who he is, what he's about, and I'm really excited to have him share this with you and share so much of his research in this newsletter. So welcome, Marc.
Oh, thank you, Therese. It's great to be with you, and thank you for that introduction. Yeah, so my background, I started off 30 years ago more, as a medical doctor, wanting to know how to be well. That was my interest. And, I went along with medical studies and I learned a lot about illness, but not a lot about wellness in my medical studies. And I ventured off and I studied Chinese medicine, I studied lifestyle, and then biomedical engineering. And for many years I was at the forefront of what we call integrative medicine or holistic medicine, and bringing in lifestyle, but also practices such as yoga and meditation and nutrition into medical practice. And then I realised that still, in the medical model, that's still about fixing things. Mm-hmm. And to fix things one at a time is not working, because the problems that we have are actually systemic, embedded in our communities, in the way we live. And really the impact of the industrialisation of our life, of our food, of our consumer products, of what we actually think, and the media. And then and for the last 15 years I've been involved in the wellness industry, which is really trying to transform our lives to lives that are supportive, are sustainable, and are about being well rather than trying to address specific illnesses. And it's interesting to see that the same practices that you would do to enhance your own well-being are very aligned with the same practices you would want to do to help the planet, to help wildlife, to reduce climate change, and to do all these other, to help your community. So wellness is a convergence of many different disciplines, of many different industries, and of many different practices that really focus on to do what is best for you, but what is best for you is also best for your community and for the planet.
Yeah, totally. And Marc, I just want to add there, it's so beautiful to see that more medical doctors are going into integrative medicine, but you're taking it one step further. I remember having a conversation with you and you said, I'm a wellness doctor, and I just love that, absolutely love that. Recently, you wrote an article for Organic Garden, and you shared the 10 toxic truths. And I'd love just to share those with our beautiful VIP members.
Yeah, well, that article is sort of a summary of the research about what is known and what is not known about toxicity and environmental chemicals in our bodies, but also in our environment. And it was actually really depressing researching this and understanding the extent of the toxicity we have. And we hear a lot about climate change and greenhouse gases and air pollution and how we've contaminated the environment. But we don't hear nearly as much about how we've contaminated our own bodies and the impact on that. And our bodies actually reflect our environment. We are what we eat, and we literally eat our environment. So it's just a way of really understanding the full extent of the impact of our lifestyles. And I'm very happy to go through the toxic truths one by one, but as a very quick overview, it used to be thought that toxicity was just about the dose. And Paracelsus 500 years ago said the dose makes the poison. And at that time, that was revolutionary science, to see that the dose can actually, something at a different dose can be poisonous and at another dose can be not poisonous. But now we've actually expanded science a lot since then. And now we know it's not just the type of chemical and the dose that makes the poison. It's also the combination of chemicals we're exposed to. And there's mixture effects. It's also the timing of when we're exposed. And unfortunately, the younger we are, the more vulnerable we are. So a fetus or a child is much more vulnerable to toxic chemical effects than an adult is, although the timing does matter, and it actually transfers through generations. And finally, it's our individual factors that also matter. So we all have a different genetic ability to detoxify chemicals. We'll have different nutritional status or health status that actually combines with the accumulation of toxic chemicals over our lifespan to cause a toxic effect. So it's not just the type of chemical and the dose, it's also the combination, the timing, and the individual factors. Yet none of them are considered. Only the dose is considered in chemical regulations, where they're regulated at all. So it's a dilemma that we have in modern life. If you want to go through the toxic truth, I'm happy to. Although I'd like to also then spend some time at least to see what people can do about it, because when you talk about the toxic truth, it becomes really overwhelming and people just get depressed and think it's too much and shut down. But there's actually positive actions we can do to counter each of those things. We should spend some time on that.
Absolutely love you to share that, even if you can just do a brief overview on the toxic truths, and then we're all about providing solutions. So we give information. What Divine is about educating people so that people can make informed choices, and that's why I love what you do so much as well. You are all about educating people and then offering people the solutions. And honestly, Marc, a lot of the solutions aren't that hard. So if you could just briefly touch on the rest of the toxic truths. I know we're going to discuss them in a webinar and go through them in more detail, but if we can just briefly touch on them for our followers, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so I like to put things into groups of 5. I mean, nature gave us 5 fingers on our hands for a reason, because we can count things, and in Chinese medicine, things are classified according to 5s, and in a lot of other philosophies. And we don't just have one hand, we have 2 hands. So often things actually fit together as 10s, but they're in pairs. And the toxic truths are like that. You can actually look at them as, pairs. And if we go through them in that, we can then talk about some of the solutions. So the first toxic truth pair is that everybody is affected, and we don't know the full extent. So we know that the top chemicals are pervasive. They actually get distributed through long-range environmental transport. So that means they go up into the atmosphere, they get distributed around the whole planet. They precipitate often in the high latitude regions and high altitude regions, but they go around the whole planet. And all living things at the moment contain pollutants at or near harmful levels. And they're also, toxic chemicals are found in all human tissues. They're found in our blood, in our placental cord blood. They're found in our food, our soil, our air, our water, and our indoor environments. And we really don't know the full extent. That's the second toxic truth, because often they're invisible. We don't monitor them. There's about 80,000 chemicals produced commercially, with more than 3 tons produced.
Crazy. Industrial
processes create a lot more through burning fossil fuels and make soot and air particulate matter. And most of them aren't tested for toxicity, and we measure very, very few in human tissue. So that's everyone's affected. We don't know the full extent. However, I'd like to say that nature has almost infinite healing power. So everyone's affected, but we can always tap into the infinite healing power of nature, and our ability to understand and to monitor and to address these issues is growing exponentially. With there's lab-on-a-chip technology now that's making measuring of these chemicals more easier. There's the internet and social platforms and crowd-funded research where people can start monitoring toxicity globally. So while the problem's never been so great, our power to address it has never been greater as well.
Yep.
So that's the first pair. The second toxic truth pair is that tiny doses can have big effects, and that's to do with endocrine disruption. And that was first brought to our attention the world's attention, where Theo Colburn and Pete Myers wrote a book called Our Stolen Future in the mid-1990s. And at the time, it was seen as a bit of alarmist. And a lot of people, commentators thought, they're just alarming people that have very, very small doses, thousands of times lower than what is allowed in regulations, can have toxic effects. So that was seen as an alarmist thing. But that recently, a couple of years ago, the World Health Organization actually confirmed what they were saying, and saying that the endocrine disrupting effects of toxic chemicals are causing the global epidemics we're seeing in diabetes, in neurodevelopmental problems, in reproductive problems, etc., and that current knowledge is just the tip of the iceberg. And the other pair to that is that the tiny doses can have big effects, and the doses magnify up the food chain. A lot of persistent organic pollutants, they can dissolve in fat, they last for decades in the environment, things like DDT and dioxins and PCBs. They accumulate in fat and tissue, and they magnify up the food chain, and it leads to much higher concentrations in predatory species and in human infants, who actually sit at the very top of the food chain, because humans eat everything, but infants eat breast milk, which is a human product. So they sit right at the very top of the food chain.
Yeah.
So that's
that's scary, isn't it?
Well, it's tragic, really, because they're the least ability to protect themselves. They're the most vulnerable, but they also have the highest exposure.
Yes.
So, but to counter that, it is possible to eat low processed foods, to eat low on the food chain, and my mantra is to eat slow food, which stands for seasonal, local, organic, and whole food. And in consuming consciously, we can reduce our exposure, and that means being conscious of the products we buy. Where possible, choosing certified organic products, which will greatly reduce our exposure. So there's a whole range of measures we can do through conscious consumption that then reduces the effects we're going to get in terms of our dosage.
Yep, for sure.
So the next pair is about the timing. So that was about dose, and then when we look at the timing is critical, we know that windows of developmental development are critical, and the toxic exposure during these critical periods can be irreversible. So if you're exposed in utero with a fetus, that can have effects later in life, and that's been shown with organophosphate pesticides, where they measured in America the level of common organophosphate pesticides in the urine of pregnant mothers in the third trimester, and those levels correlated with the children's intellectual development 7. We also know that from the tragedy of thalidomide, for example, where in utero exposure to that drug, thalidomide caused the limb buds not to form, and had hundreds of thousands of babies born with no arms. And these effects, we now know, are transgenerational. So parental exposure to industrial chemicals affects the offspring and future generations, as many as 4 generations down the track. So these are epigenetic changes that then get down through the generations, and that's been shown in animals, and there's research showing that in humans as well, that it affects your children, and your children's children's children. The legacy we're leaving is for many, many generations to come.
For sure. So, Marc, just I know that one of the quickest ways for a woman to have a baby, and I'd love you to explain that a little bit more. And also, you mentioned breastfeeding and how that's another way to detox, and the average chemicals found in breast milk around the world. I think what would
best possible food for a human infant.
Yes.
So that's really important to say that. However, breast milk is also contaminated foods for a human infant. Over the mother's milk. Fat is a valuable biological resource. It takes your body energy to make fat. And when there's fat-soluble toxic chemicals like dioxins and PCBs and DDT and its metabolites, they get dissolved in the fatty tissue, And it's quite difficult for the body, and the body doesn't normally excrete fat. And one of the few times the body will excrete fat is to give it to an infant in the form of breast milk. And there's been studies all over the world. Breast milk is one of the widely studied substances around the world, looking at levels of these fat-soluble chemicals. And it's present in virtually every breast milk sample that's been studied. You can find DDT residues, PCBs, dioxins, organochlorine, pesticides, etc. So, and it is true that that women detoxify their own bodies through their breast milk into their infant. So, and infants aren't born with a clean slate. The same toxins actually pass through the placenta into the infant. And if you think about a fetus, there's not a lot of fat on a fetus, and the fattiest organ in our bodies, and certainly in the fetal body, is the brain. So these chemicals go through the placenta, they lodge in the fetal brain, and then the baby's born and starts having toxic chemicals through the breast milk, which is still, as I say, the best possible food for a human infant. But it also means that if you're a second child, you actually get cleaner breast milk than a first child. So all the second, if you're a second or third sibling, thank your older siblings for taking the toxic brunt for you. And it also means that having children is a way that women can reduce their toxic load, although it's tragic to think that they're actually imparting that onto their children.
Yeah, and most people don't know this, and that's why we always talk about detoxification prior to conception, which is the most important thing, to be able to then, we worry when we're actually pregnant what we're doing, and when we have a baby, we are concerned not to put chemicals on, but it's really getting rid of and removing those chemicals before you have a baby so that you're not passing those fat-soluble chemicals on to your children. And, there's easy processes to do that. Naturopaths and nutritionists can work with people in regard to that. And if anyone who is watching this would like to like information on that, we're holding our online global mums and babies health summit, and we have Professor Marc Cohen speaking about that, as well as many other experts in this field. So yeah, Marc, I just think that's absolutely amazing. And I guess what I'd like to ask you now is just some simple solutions. We've talked about some of the toxic truths. We'll go into more detail regarding those in our webinar. If you can just share what you believe are the solutions regarding this and this toxic exposure, and also share a little bit about the glyphosates. I know that that's one of your passions as well. And again, it's because what we're about is what we're putting on our body, what we're putting in our body, and what we're specializing in particular with Divine is what we're putting on our body. There's so much other information out there that you in particular do in relation to glyphosates, organophosphates, and so on.
Well, I guess the solutions sort of counter the toxic truth. So everyone's affected. We don't know the full extent, but we can learn, and we're learning at an exponential rate. We know that the small doses have big effects and they increase up the food chain, but we can consciously choose to have products that have low exposure or low toxic content or no toxic content. We know that toxic chemicals accumulate over our lifespan in our fat, and that chemical mixtures are more potent and more toxic than individual chemicals. But we can also maximize our excretory pathways. So we need to keep all our channels of excretion open. So it's really important to, eat lots of soluble fibre so our bowels keep moving. To drink lots of clean water. There's herbal teas. I'm a big fan of Tulsi, holy basil, as we can do a whole webinar on Tulsi. It's got so many health properties, but it helps to detoxify. But you can grow it yourself in the garden. In India, it's worshipped as a god, but drinking lots of Tulsi tea or other herbal teas that stimulate the kidneys and keep our body flushed, through our kidneys. Sweating a lot, so keeping our skin flushed is really important. So keeping these channels of elimination clear and clean. And also, and it's not often talked about, I guess, in the chemical literature, but it's keeping our brain clean and clear. So we also need to keep our mind. Because when you start to find out about these toxic chemicals and that they're everywhere, it becomes really depressing, and stress itself can be toxic. So we need to actively de-stress. So to having time every day where we do some mindfulness practice or some a time when we can really clear our mind and just tune into nature or tune into an activity that we love to do, that we immerse ourselves and lose track of time while we're doing these activities. That's also really valuable in terms of reducing the toxic stress load, which also transmits across generations. And now there's a lot of research showing that toxic stress has very, very similar effects to toxic chemicals. In that, if you're exposed to toxic stress early in life, that's got impacts later in life, and it does cross generations as well. So all of these things are impacting on us. So we need ways to say clean and clear our brain, our bowels, our bladder, our bodies, and our breath. So, getting out into nature. Air pollution is one of the biggest silent killers now. I mean, more people in Australia die from air pollution than the road toll. And
crazy.
And I think globally, more people die from air pollution than starvation. I was reading this morning. I mean, I'm on these research lists, so every day I get the latest updates on research into the effect of toxic chemicals, and now that they can predict children's health and behaviour and intellectual function based on how close they are to high traffic areas. That's got a big impact on children's health and neurological function because of the pollution caused by traffic, high traffic regions. Yep. So finding a place in nature where you can breathe easy, going to the ocean or into the woods.
Yeah, I'm just mindful of, I could talk to you for a week in regard to this, and our webinar will be able to expand on it. And it's also 50% of what we put on our body goes into our organs and into our bloodstream. And I know I've been speaking to you a lot about that, and it's so important to minimise toxins in every area. Would you like to mention anything about that as well?
About minimising
what we're putting on our skin, and how important it is to only use certified organic.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's what's in our. I mean, you shouldn't put anything in your skin that you wouldn't put in your mouth.
Yeah,
because things that go through your skin get absorbed into the body, and in fact, they get absorbed more directly because when we eat something, it first goes through the stomach, gets digested, and then gets processed through the liver, which has an ability to detoxify and modify some of the chemicals that we're eating. Whereas in the skin, it absorbs straight into the bloodstream and it bypasses the liver. So, that principle of not putting anything on your skin that you wouldn't put in your mouth is an important one, and really being conscious of the products that you buy. And at the moment, it's so difficult to do that because the ingredient lists are so long, and the only surety you have is the certified organic logo, because then there's no genetically modified organisms, there's no pesticides used in the products, and the ingredients are petrochemical free. So that does give consumers an assurance that there's minimal petrochemicals and industrial toxic chemicals in those products. And now, I mean, I know you have some organic personal care products, but the range of personal care products that are organically certified globally is increasing at a dramatic rate because people are becoming more aware of that. And I think it's really important that people minimise what they put on their skin and only use products that do have either organic certification label or that are pure, natural, very minimally processed products. Exactly.
So, I guess now what I'd love to say is just finish up and just say I'm so thankful for, and Divine, as we are so thankful to knowing you, Marc, and having the opportunity to share your information and to work with you. We're doing a study together, which is very exciting, and we'll share more of that on our webinar, and also our Global Online Mums and Babies Health Summit. We'll be able to you'll be able to listen to Marc more on that. So I just want to wrap up now and say we are very, very grateful, Marc, for your time, giving us your time, for everything you do, and for imparting your knowledge onto our VIP members, and being such a gracious, such an incredible wellness advocate for mankind. So thank you very, very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening and being part of our VIP program. We're here to educate and to provide you with information to make informed choices. Month, we will say goodbye now.